Sorry to interrupt some of these conversations, but it's okay. We're gonna get started on time as best we can. We're already a couple minutes late. And we do have a quorum, I believe, so. So if we could, let's call the roll, please.
Senator McDaniel.
Present from the district.
Thank you. Senator Mills. Senator Neal. Senator Parrott. Senator Wilson. Representative Graham. Thank you. Representative Petrie.
Present remotely from my annex office.
Thank you. Representative Tipton. Representative Weber. Thank you. Representative Wheatley.
Here in the room.
Joseph Fons. Mike Harmon. John Hicks.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Mike Jefferson. Sharon Mattingly.
Present remotely.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
Present in the room.
Senator Higdon.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Representative Duplessis.
Here. And we do have a quorum. So this meeting is in order. Before we get started, I'd like to just see if we have approval for last month's minutes. See Representative Weber. Do we have a second? Second. Yeah. I can't. Okay. 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 Thank you so much. Okay. With that being said, we're going to start with Jim Carroll. Jim Carroll is the president of the Kentucky Government Retirees, and he'd like to talk to us in this committee about COLAs. So if you would, announce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours. Jim, turn your mic on, please. Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Jim Carroll. I'm president of Kentucky Government Retirees. We're an organization that represents 15,000 retired and active members of the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority. I'm here today to discuss retiree cost of living adjustments. My organization was founded 10 years ago at the height of the pension crisis. We've never advocated for a COLA. We've been far more concerned about efforts to strengthen the fiscal status of the KPPA funds. It's been pointed out many times that the key to restoring the funds to solvency is consistent full actuarial contributions from employers. We look forward to the day when contribution rate phase-ins and freezes have ended and every employer is contributing what the actuaries say is necessary to sustain the funds. Coincidentally, just as it's been a decade since my organization was founded, it's been about 10 years since the last retiree cost of living adjustment was granted. As we all know, COLAs contributed to the steady rise in liabilities because they were permanent incremental benefit enhancements. COLAs were granted even during years of disastrous investment losses and in years when employers failed to provide full contributions. Over the past decade, the inflation rate has been relatively low. Nonetheless, the cost of living has risen about 14% since 2012. Most public pension plans around the country provide a COLA for its members as a hedge against inflation. We're here today to ask the Oversight Board to consider ways that a COLA might be granted for current KPPA retirees. The Pension Reform Bill, Senate Bill 2, provides for a pre-funded cost of living adjustment underwritten by a general fund allocation. We would certainly support such a measure. However, we recognize that the demand for general fund dollars will always exceed the supply. We'd like to propose an alternative funding method. We believe the extraordinary investment returns experienced by all KPPA funds in the past fiscal year present an opportunity. As you're aware, KPPA experienced the highest returns in its history last year. We appreciate the outstanding work of the KPPA in managing our investments. The pension fund portfolios altogether gained $3.15 billion during the fiscal year. The rates of return exceeded 20% across the board, which is 3 to 4 times the anticipated rates. View this unprecedented windfall, we propose a time-limited COLA financed from a small portion of that gain. KPPA pays out about $2.2 billion in benefits a year. A 1.5% COLA would therefore cost roughly $33 million annually. What we propose is a cost of living adjustment that would be paid for about 5 years. At the end of that period, the adjustment would end and benefits would revert to their original amounts. The cost would represent a small fraction of the asset increase experienced by the KPPA pension funds last year. We've engaged with KPPA management on this proposal. We know the actuary will weigh in on it. We recognize that the actuary's analysis is important. We believe a cost of living adjustment would be an investment in Kentucky's economy. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, every dollar spent to support public pensions in Kentucky produces $1.35 in spending in our state. We hope the Oversight Board decides to look further into this topic in anticipation of the upcoming session. We'd be happy to provide our feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a comment, and do we have some questions as well? Our first comment is going to go from Co-Chair Higdon, who's...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
I appreciate that, talking to you remotely. And Mr. Carroll, thank you. I appreciate your passion and your representation of your retirees across the state. And I think we all know that a COLA would certainly be a huge benefit for those who haven't received one for quite some time. As you know, though, it's not an easy lift, and but I promise you we will take a look. I can't promise you that I would support one, but I promise you we'll take a look at it. And thank you for the alternative plan that you presented. It's certainly food for thought. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And Representative Graham, did you have your hand up, sir?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Have you, Mr. Carroll, been in discussions with the Kentucky retirement system?
We have.
Well, now with the KPPA.
I've met both with Mr. Eager, and I've also made a public comment to the KPPA Board of Trustees announcing what our ideas were around that. So both management and the Board of Trustees are aware of the concept that we've come up with.
So what's their take on this?
I'll defer to Mr. Eager on where he stands. I know he's referred the matter to his actuary. The board has not taken a position. I don't think the board probably will take a position explicitly on benefits, but we...
Well, do you know, do you have a range as to how much this cost of living would cost?
We think it would cost about $33 million based on, we use 1.5% as a COLA because that was typical of previous COLAs. If we'd have presented 1%, that might have not been very impactful, and 2% we're getting into more costs. So we figured 1.5%, just doing math of $2.2 billion paid out, 1.5%, it's $33 million. The key here is this is a non-recurring, it's not a permanent benefit, because in the past when they did COLAs, it's a COLA for the life of the pensioner, and it has to be obviously amortized over that time, and that's when you get into real costs. This is considered just a one-time opportunity because of this huge amount of money coming in to pay for a COLA temporarily. We call it a catch-up COLA because it's not intended to make anyone whole. It's intended to defray a bit of the cost of living over the past decade.
And it's not also to make up for those 10 years, but to at least give you a little bit of a cost of living increase, because you've gone over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken by your testimony, that state employees or retirees have not had that. The last COLA was July 1st, 2011. So if you look at the cost of living since then, if you simply do a multiply of 2012 to now, it's about 14.3%. And if you gave a COLA over 5 years, you might provide about 7% of percentage points of that lost cost of living. Might catch up a little bit. It's not intended to make us whole in the current environment.
first and foremost, we need to get our base benefit, and that in itself is a hard lift, and we recognize that. And frankly, if the returns had been 8% or 10% or 15%, then we wouldn't have proposed this idea because we need that money. We just think this was an opportunity when you're making $3 billion. If it's $3.15 billion that they've made, it would cost that 0.15 to provide a COLA for 5 years. That seems like a pretty reasonable investment.
I agree, and I think if we can and get an analysis, a cost analysis of it, I would hope that we could move in that direction. Working with retirement people, I would definitely support it. I think it's due, and I'm speaking from a seat that has a lot of retirees in it, a lot of public employees in it. Over 50% of the workforce in Franklin County are public employees.
And those retirees spend money in the community. I mean, that's important. That's
in every
another
community,
important,
not just in Franklin County, but in every community.
That's right. Every
All
county has
120
retirees,
counties. That's
and
exactly
all of
right.
us spend money. We don't take that money and put it under the mattress. When I go into Kroger, they stop everything and look, hey, there's Jim Carroll. I'm going to make payroll this week because they know I'm going to spend that money with them, and that's true of virtually 95% of the retirees live in Kentucky. They spend the money in Kentucky, and that money circulates in the economy.
So let me just make a comment, maybe even a question. I think the way you opened your presentation was perfect. You recognize the issue we're in, and that the base pension is critical. We got to get that on solid ground, and that a COLA is too. And I want to reiterate that I agree with you. I think making sure that we have the pension systems very, very solid and without worrying about it being at a 14% funding ratio kind of thing is important. And I think a COLA for the retirees is also important. And I don't think this legislature should blow off a COLA. It's something that needs to be part of that pension system if we can figure out how to make it happen. So that would be my goal as well. Just a couple questions. And I agree with your logic of, hey, we got this windfall of money right now. Why don't we throw some of that towards the retirees, a small portion of that. I have two, I won't call it concerns, but just two thoughts about that. Whatever that $33 million is, whatever that number would be, when you look at compounding interest, it's money that's not going into the pensions to pay down debt. It's a compounding interest, so it's quite a bit more than $33 million in the long haul. It's $33 million a year, but there's compounding interest issues with that I think we need to wrap our arms around. Secondly, if I'm John Q. Public and I'm getting I get a COLA, and then I get used to that COLA for 5 years, and then it goes away. Most retirees aren't used to giving back money. They're on a fixed income, and to make them budget backwards is not something we would normally do.
That's correct.
And so I'm a little concerned about that, to be honest with you. So those are my two concerns with your idea. I think it's definitely worth considering, and I definitely want to figure out how to make a COLA as part of a normal thing for our retirees. I think that's important, whatever that number is, whether it's 1% or 2% or whatever. It needs to be there to keep up with inflation best we can.
It will be a messaging issue if we say you get this COLA and at the end of it it's going to end, because it's never happened that I know of.
Right.
On the other hand, we've never been in this kind of situation, and 14% funded, where we really have these challenges. I mean, it was a close call 5 or 6 years ago that we were going to be pay as you go, as you well know.
Yeah. I just
so
know
we're weighing those things, and that's right. It doesn't make a lot of people are going to say, "Well, where did it go this year?"
And in my home, in my when I do my budgets, back when I was learning to get out of debt, thank you, Dave Ramsey. All my extra money went towards paying off my debt, because I knew that when I got out of debt, that all the money I was wasting on interest payments went to now things that I want to do. And I know that personally, when I got myself out of debt is when I truly springboarded into financial won't call it wealth, but financial stability. So I think the same thing holds true. It's different with the state, but the premise is similar. And we need to just keep that in mind. If we do spend that money on a COLA, there is some compounding interest that we're going to have to pay. Representative Miller.
Just a few comments, Mr. Chairman, one is building on Co-Chairman Higdon's comments. I think it's worthy to look at it. I think, as Chairman Duplessis just said, I think it's pretty unrealistic to think that you could give somebody something for 5 years and then take it back. But I do believe that we should put something into statute saying if inflation, which seems to be rearing its ugly head, exceeds a certain benchmark or a certain number, that a COLA be granted. Certainly, we've, for the last, almost 40 years, we've been in a very low inflation environment. But like you, Jim, I remember those days of Jimmy Carter and first couple of years of Reagan before he got inflation under control. And actually goes back to Gerald Ford. We just had some massive inflation for about 8 years, and that's going to be a huge hit for retirees if that happens again. So, although we all know the legislature can always not withstand something, I think it's something we ought to consider putting in statute.
There are some, not the same thing, but there are some states where they say if you have an assumed rate of 5% on your return, if you hit X 8% or 10%, then you can put a little money in. So there are I guess you would call them contingency COLAs, not tied to cost of living, but tied to performance of investments. Something to consider.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
I just have one comment to make.
Okay.
And I understand everything, Mr. Chairman, you talked about, but also what I think is being asked that we also, Mr. Carroll, I'm not putting words in your mouth, is that I hope that as a General Assembly, we could also invest in the human capital. And with those individuals who have worked for state government and have provided the service that they have for over 20 years, 27 years, some even as much as 40 years, that we are taking a step and saying we appreciate the service that you have provided to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And based on the past 10 years, we have not been able to do it, that we are investing in capital, which is human capital, which will help, as you said in your early comments, all across Kentucky because there are retirees in all 120 counties. So I would just want to add that to the comments that were made earlier. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with Representative Graham, but we aren't in a typical situation. So that's why it's hardest to say here's some money because we're in a hole, and what we should have been doing is thinking about that human capital 20 years ago when we were maybe having poor assumptions, when we were not fully funding, when we were doing a lot of things we shouldn't have been doing, when we were shifting employees to temporary work instead of keeping them in the system. We did a lot of things wrong, and I think this legislature in the last few years has done a lot of things right to right the ship. I know there's a lot of people in this room who have helped write legislation to do that, and we're making progress. And I think COLAs need to be part of the discussion. I think COLAs need to be part of the long term for sure. And I'm open to ideas. And one thing before we close and go to the next section, Mr. Eager, you were mentioned in the. He was going to defer to you. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
When I come up, you want me to?
However you'd like to do it, sir.
Why don't I wait till I get up? With a light?
I think he's done. Mr. Carroll, are you?
Yes, except to say I appreciate what the board has done over these years. That the General Assembly is far more committed, far more engaged, far more informed, and has done a lot to get us back on the road to solvency. We very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We'll continue to do so. I so hope. Thank you, sir. Mr. Eager, I guess I'll just let you go first, and you can respond and then get into your presentation.
Got a low chair. I mean,
Yeah, you might want to sit up there a
bad
little bit.
enough being 5'8" or 5'9".
Anybody got a phone book?
Yeah.
If you would, just announce yourself.
Sure. I'm David Eager. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Public Pensions Authority, formerly known as Kentucky Retirement System. And I asked to have invited also Danny White and Janie Shaw from GRS in case questions came up that you wanted to direct to them or they wanted to elaborate on things I said. So they are, I believe, live. You want to identify yourselves?
Yes, this is Janie Shaw, actuary for Kentucky Public Pension System.
And again, Danny White, actuary for with GRS for the public KPPA.
Mr. Chairman, to your question, I do think I was advised by somebody on KPPA that COLAs were going to be a topic at the October meeting. I don't know, is that good information or bad? Beg pardon? I still, no, at KPP, at the PPOB.
There could be further conversations, but we were starting the conversation today.
Okay, because we're kind of prepared to drill down quite a bit further into that issue, but I'll make some comments and I'll ask GRS to weigh in as well. We had a great year. It was the best year ever, and it's not only true for us, it's true all around the country, and these discussions are being had in more than one state system. I mean, the whole idea of a dividend or a bonus or whatever, what do we do with it? I would say that when we make our assumptions, we assume there are going to be good years and bad years. And by the way, Mr. Carroll's math, at least initially, is correct. I mean, that's $33 million a year for 5 years. He didn't factor in the fact of lost interest, but that part of it's correct. And so if you took the, and this was our record year, if you took the returns year by year in the markets and you put them on a scale, negative to positive, year by year, you're going to have most of them in the middle. It forms a bell-shaped curve. Outliers out here, and we had an outlier out here. I mean, the fact that we've never had, that's 2 standard deviation or 3 standard deviation. We're going to have outliers over here too. And that factors into when you're talking about 5 1/4 or 6 1/4, they're factoring in the fact that we're going to have some of these years, and there is no way to claw something back once you give it. I from a personal standpoint, I totally empathize with the fact that people haven't gotten a COLA. But from a system standpoint, in a managing this oversight of the system, you have to recognize that this was it's a one-time event, but it's really it's a judgment call on the legislator what they want to do. And there are. Speaking of the next meeting, I think between now and then there's going to be a whole lot of different ideas that come up, and that's why we wanted to have a chance to be able to speak to that, because this won't be the single idea, I suspect. People are going to want to know about extending it further and a variety of things, and that's what's happening in other states. They're looking at a variety of options. I don't know that there's no legislature's had a chance to weigh in, and I don't know how it's going to come out. But we can give some, if in fact we're on the agenda in October, we can give you some background about other states and what how prominent certain things are and what's going on. I did jokingly have one of our staff say, I don't want to work in the call center on the 6th year. we'll get blamed for it. We'll get blamed for you took money away from us, which is what'll happen. I mean, that's the reality is, if you reach the 6th year and there's no continuation of that, people are going to lose. They're going to lose a benefit. They're going to lose the 1.5%. But GRS, you want to weigh in, Danny and Janie?
Sure. Mr. Eager, I think you said it really nicely. In terms of when we look at these investment returns that we saw this year, we don't necessarily see them as excess asset returns. As Mr. Eager stated, I mean, investment returns are inherently volatile, and we expect years that will be higher than the assumed return, and we expect years that will be below the assumed return. So we don't necessarily see these as excess returns that can be used to pay for benefits. It would certainly be our position that, especially given the funded status of some of these funds, that any benefit enhancements that want to be made, that those would be fully paid. And but I will note that, you know, we are definitely sensitive. We know there's been high levels of inflation, especially the last year. So we certainly understand the retirees' want for that COLA and for that increase.
And Mr. Carroll's proposal does pre-fund it. I mean, I think that would qualify. I would think GRS would say the same thing. It's going to come out of the general fund. It's going to be paid for. It's not going to be deferred, not going to be amortized over some period of time. But that's a fact of the matter.
Mm-hmm. So I know that we're going to talk about some other things down the road about how we could do a COLA possibly. My understanding is what Wisconsin does is as markets come up and down, they share that COLA. The COLA will come and go, and the retirees understand that it's market based. Is there any talk about how that would work for the state if we could do something like what Wisconsin? Do you know how Wisconsin's works? You could explain it better than me.
I do not specifically know, but we can have that information a month from now. And we haven't been a part of the conversation, other than I've talked with Jim Carroll. I mean, he came and we've talked about it, but there's been no other conversation that's come to us.
Fair enough. Any questions for Mr. Eager before he gets into his official presentation? Yeah.
You know, they talked about the $33 million per year. Do we know what the fully funded cost of doing a 1.5% that just continues to go on?
Yeah. GRS, you got
Is your mic on?
Your schedule at hand?
Is your mic? David, is your mic on?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Let me turn closer.
We do. It would be about in like the 350 million range.
Okay. Thank you.
That's for a 1 year permanent 1.5% COLA. So that's just a 1 year increase, 1.5% increase.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So it would be 1.5% perpetual.
Yep.
But done just once. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else with a question or comment? Representative Wheatley.
Just to clarify that was 1.5% one time and not 1.5% each year building on the previous. It's just 1.5% one time for all systems would be 350 million.
That's correct. So each retiree's benefit would increase by 1.5%, but that increase would get paid for the rest of their lives, but no additional increases after the 1 year.
Thank you.
All right.
Proceed?
Yes, sir. Please do.
Okay. Good news. I was looking back from 2007 to 2021, those 15 years. 14 of those 15 years, the pension cost to the state either went up or stayed flat. 1 year it went down. And I asked around, what happened to make that go down that 1 year? Nobody seems to know. It's far enough back and nobody knows. But essentially, in 11 straight years, the contribution that's been paid, I don't have data going back beyond that, but 11 straight years, the contribution that's been paid has either been increased or flat or increased. So we've got good news. It's going down in fiscal 23. So we're seeing some of the benefits of the funding. We're seeing some of the benefits of some of the legislation that's been passed. A variety of things, but we are, you're going to see not strikingly good news, but good news. And I've explained it time and again. We have like a 28-year mortgage, and this year's payment goes a little bit toward principal and a lot toward interest, and that gradually changes over time. So it's going to come down gradually, but we're seeing a 2.5 to 3 or 4% decline in the contribution rates in most cases. C has as an exception because they have not quite fully phased into their 12% rise, but they're in the last year of it, so they will see the benefit also. So I'm going to show estimated contribution rates, and I say estimated because they haven't done the valuation for June 30th of 2021 yet. They know the assets. They know the population as of June 30th of 2020. They use that population to project going forward, but it's going to be adjusted when we get the actual 2021 population of how many people are in what system. Their anticipation is that will be a positive contributor to the contribution rate. In other words, it'll cause it to go down a little bit more. That's the anticipation, but we don't know for sure. The process says they'll have numbers, GRS will have numbers for us in October. I don't know by the time of the PPOB in October, but hopefully. They will present the full val to our boards in November, and our boards will approve, presumably, the vals in our meeting in December. So October, we should be able to see something that's a little more firm, but we don't anticipate it's going to change very much. So I want to step back and kind of a reminder. I think it's you've got new people. You all deal with a ton of things in different areas. It's kind of a reminder of the way we build a cost. I think it'll be helpful to kind of put some perspective on it. So it starts off, we have two aspects. We have normal cost, and the normal cost is saying, if this plan were fully funded and we were just paying for the benefits we anticipate people are earning this year to add to what they've earned in the past, that's the normal cost. And then we have the unfunded liability, which is the big number. And it's paying down this year's portion of the unfunded liability. So it's being amortized over 30 years. We're in 28 now. What is this year's portion of paying that mortgage? It's like our monthly mortgage payment. And that, in most cases, it's also done as a percent of pay. With the House Bill 8 now, we are doing it, we're taking the K-non-has and we're saying, all right, there's a liability here in dollars. What's each employer's share of that liability as of June 30th of 2019? And whatever that percentage is, they're going to pay a percentage, same percentage going forward of the then current unfunded liability. So if we're 1% of the total at June 30th of 2019, we're going to be 1% of the total in 2020 and 21 and 22 and 23. Exception being that we had two employers leave the system, Northern Kentucky and Kentucky Housing, and they paid off their obligation. It works out, therefore, of the remainders. The remainder is smaller, but the percentage allocation is going to go up for each person. It's kind of it nets itself out in effect. So two costs. Two types of plans, pension with 12.7, this is June 30, 12.7 billion in assets, and insurance with 5.7 billion. This again is June 30 of 2020. It collectively, the pensions are 33.6% funded, insurance are 69.8. Most of the insurance are in the 70s, and they're probably going to go to the 80s, low 80s. And the 33.6, it ranges from 14% for K-non-has up into the low 50s for some of the other plans. So you can look at it one of two ways. We are not the worst funded state in the country. If you use 33.6, we're about third worst. If you look at K-non-has, it's the worst. So when we blend it together, it paints a little better picture. And I think the story for the rating agencies, you haven't asked about that, but I think the story with the rating agencies is getting better and better. And I think House Bill 8 went a long way toward having them see that we're working our way out of this situation. So looking at, there are the normal cost. This is by tier 1, tier 2, 2 and 3, going across to K, non-has, has, C, non-has and has, and state police. You can see the benefit from a cost standpoint of moving to tier 2 and moving to tier 3 in particular. I focus on the non-has plans, K and C, tier 3. The cost is only 3.49% for the K and 3.01%. So if we had no unfunded liability and we are running that system and paying the normal cost of what it takes, 3% of pay, 3.5% of pay. And over time, as we have members of Tier 1 retire and move out and new people coming into Tier 3, the blended rate's going to keep going down. And if you could project out 50 years from now, if nothing changed, the blended rate would be about 3.5% for K and 3% for C. There's the insurance rates. I mean, normal cost for insurance for K non-HAS 0.37%, and it's so low because legislation changed the level of benefit, reduced it severely, and that's number one. Number two is and why is K non-HAS so much less than C, even though they're both low? We get a lot of turnover, and K non-HAS a lot more turnover, so people don't stay around to earn the benefit. So we don't need to fund it that heavily. So normal costs. So some of you are familiar with the 10.10. We throw that out all the time. That's the normal cost of the last 2 years, and it's what's in the projection right now. It'll probably go down somewhat, but it's comprised of the pension at 790 and the insurance at 220, and you go to C non-HAS, and I keep doing that because those are major plans, but 646 and 269. So the normal cost is right around 10%, and it's going to gradually reduce. The problem is we can't get the unfunded liability to go away that fast, and it is so big. So there's unfunded liability. K non-HAS, pension 67, insurance is 7, insurance is 7 because the plans are so much better funded. And we kind of ignore the insurance a lot. I think partly because they are so much better funded, they are so much less cost, but there's a lot of assets. I mean, they now have they have not half of the assets, but they've got a pretty significant amount. We had $6 billion in assets in those plans, but fortunately, with the exception of K non-HAS, they're well funded. K hazardous has a negative number because it's overfunded. I don't recall the exact rate. I could look in my SAFR, but it's like 130%. So it's getting a negative unfunded calculation. So you put the two together, and that's where we come up. 8503 is probably in some people's minds. That's how it comes together. It's the 1010 and the 7493. Again, the 10 that may go down slightly, and I've got the projections. I'll take that back. I'm going to show you the projections, which are lower than that, and that may go down slightly as we get the population in. So, questions? Here's the rates that were building up to these couple of slides coming up. Looking at 23 and fiscal 23 and 24, and it's a 2-year because we do the 2-year because of the biennial budget. K has no insurance cost, but 3162 pension cost. So 3162 versus currently 3243. So that's down. I had a number written down someplace, but that's down 5.5%. State police goes from 146 down to 141.77. That's down about 3%. So as I said earlier, it's good news. They're small increments, but it's a lot better than what we've seen for 15 years. If you go to the C side, C non-HAS goes from 26.95 down to 26.93, and that's been affected by the phase-in, the 12% phase-in, where they are now out of it. This is the last year that came into effect. C hazards at the bottom has still got a rate above what it was the year before, and they have one more. This is the last year, one more year for them to be affected by and this is it, be affected by the phase-in. One more slide. So we have, for the executive budget, right now we're using the 10.1% normal cost. Again, that's probably going to be a little less than that when we get to final. The unfunded amortization, total unfunded amortization for K9 has is $1,002,000,000. The executive branch portion of that's $766 million. That's down from 784, and the total is down from $1,022,000,000. So again, good news. I wish it were a lot better good news, but it's going the right way.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eager. Do we have any questions about this presentation? Mr. Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a short, easy question, I think, Mr. Eager. We saw that the 2022 number is $784 million. The anticipated or estimated for 2023 is $766, and that's a slight reduction. Do you recall, or do you have data that shows what we anticipated the fiscal year 2023 number to be? For instance, if it were, we probably thought it was going to be higher than $766 million. Do you recall what that difference is?
I don't, but GRS, Danny, do you have that?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume that we would expect the amortization payment to be level or a level dollar. So, it would be consistent with the 7084 that you see for FY 2022. All that change, or this estimated change yet to 767 million rounded, is all due to investments. That's the only thing that's changed from last year's val to what we estimate this year, reflect the market value performance. We'll note, just for completeness, that the 2021 valuation is not yet completed, so that'll factor in the census data or any change in membership data, and so it'll finalize that number. So the 767 million is an estimate, and that number will be trued up or finalized later this year, November, December. But demographic changes are certainly going to be much less in magnitude than what we're seeing right here due to the investment performance.
Yeah.
Thanks, Danny, and that prompts this question. It's from what you just explained, it sounds like we actually don't do, for instance, here we won't have an estimated fiscal year 24. If we did, it would be exactly as it was the year before, because that's our actuarial amount that we anticipate every year, because that's I know that the market goes up and down and all the other things that could happen, but we have to have a consistent number for our amortization period for the entire time. Correct?
It's generally true. And then I'll just add to that one comment, is I understand that this year when we get back to the budget, that it's going to be back to a biennial budget, 2-year budget. So this, whatever's finalized for FY 2023 will also be applicable for FY 2024. And
as in the past, they'll do a valuation, and it'll show what the number would have been had we not have a biennial budget, and it'll be modestly different than that.
All right, thank you.
Representative Wheatley, kind of GRS can correct me if I'm misleading you, but K9 has earned about 22%. The assumption was 5.25%, so we got a premium of 16+%. You get spread over 5 years, so you get a benefit of about 3% in any given year. 3% of 784 million is about 22 million, and that's not exactly the number difference between the two, but that's kind of shows the impact of the that amortization. We're going to get that benefit for 4 more years, and hopefully we aren't going to have any minus 10s that take away from it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Well, you're getting off fairly easy. Good reports make it a lot easier.
Well, I tell you, and I say this I don't think they say it too often, but Hospital 8 is a lifesaver for us. I mean, it really was. We were in a whirlpool and it pulled us out of it. So,
Well, hopefully you'll have more meetings like today. You're bringing
Yeah.
good news.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now we got the competing bows. I guess Bo Barnes. How about that? We'll let age go before beauty. Sorry. Welcome, Bo.
Thank you.
If you would, just go ahead and, for the record, announce who you are and go ahead and proceed at your leisure.
Yes. So, Bo Barnes, I serve as Deputy Executive Secretary and as General Counsel for the Teachers Retirement System. Let me click out of this. Let's see. Yeah. If I click out of this, am I okay? I'm trying to click on that. There we go.
Okay, and go to the slide. And then we want to do screen sharing. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jan. Good afternoon. I was asked today to discuss TRS budget request for the upcoming biennium. That is for fiscal years 2023 and 2024. The numbers I have today are preliminary. Particularly, I'll point out fiscal year 24, as with KPPA and as GRS mentioned, the FY 2024 budget request will be based on the actuarial valuation for the fiscal year that just ended June 30th, fiscal year 2021. And that valuation is not completed yet, although we have some numbers and we have some preliminary numbers to share with the board today.
And before you get started, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I know your board met yesterday. Will the numbers you go over today, will they include the phase-in of assumptions or not?
Yes, I'll go into, I can explain all that in my presentation.
Okay.
Yes,
and,
sir.
And just while we got you stopped, Senator McDaniel was hoping to make a comment real fast. So, Senator, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And just kind of back to where we left off with Dave there as he was making his comment. I just want to caution everybody that, as we begin to think about things, and I heard what might have been a little bit of splitting hairs, this, that, and the other, we still have to remember that we're a ways off from what would be a healthy funding level. And I will tell you that, since I've been here, starting in 2013, that was the first year we actually started fully funding the ARC. And we've got to maintain that commitment. And if we want to put more money into the base funding of this, I think that's a worthy consideration. But we've got to be really careful of beginning to split too many hairs when we're still looking at a plan that's 34% funded. And that was my only comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And Bo, now, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all yours.
Yes. So with regard to the fiscal year 2024 request, of course, that's going to be based on the actuarial valuation for fiscal year 2021. And the timeline for that is we have some preliminary numbers today. We will send over a more formal budget request to the Office of State Budget Director and to the General Assembly November 1st. And we'll have as refined numbers as we can at that point of time to provide. But the valuation, the actual valuation for fiscal year 2021 will be complete by November 15th. And then shortly after that, we'll have the final numbers that we will be sending over to the State Budget Director and the General Assembly for presentation for the 2022 session. So with that, I am going to go on into the numbers. So again, these are preliminary. I'm going to focus primarily on the numbers that are in the boxes, and I'm going to, in those rows, and I'm also going to focus primarily on the columns, to the two columns to the far right. Those are the estimated budget requests for fiscal year 2023 and 2024. And just for reference, to the left of those, you have the actually appropriated amounts for fiscal year 2021 and 2022. But I'm going to, again, focus on the columns to the far right. So the first boxed numbers at the top here, you will see $75,300,000 for fiscal year 2023 and $82 million for fiscal year 2024. That's primarily contributions by the state that will be requested for the health insurance trust. There's some other smaller items in there for leaves of absence matching for like maternity leave. Moving on down, we have the next row of boxed numbers. These are Adec numbers. So these are actually determined employer contributions that are needed. And you see the amounts of $733,100,000 for fiscal year 23, $801,300,000 for fiscal year 24. Going up above that line, just above that line, you're going to see the amount for the additional employer contributions requested so that TRS may implement its funding plan to pay off that legacy unfunded liability, again, like a home mortgage. And we have a little less than 24 years left in that amortization period to pay off that unfunded liability, at which point, the cost of TRS is going to be about 6% of payroll, so drastically reduced. And that's going to be a great day when we can get there. And certainly we appreciate all the additional funding that we've been getting the last several years that are helping us achieve and implement that funding plan and achieve that goal. So you see the additional funding requested, $629,400,000 for fiscal year 23, and then an additional $707,200,000 for fiscal year 24. So you're seeing an increase there of about $77 million. A lot of things going on with that. First, this is preliminary. I talked to the actuary today. That $707 million figure, they said will go down some. I don't know if it's going to be very much, but they said it will go down some. So I'm hoping for more than less. So we'll see what the final numbers show. That increase reflects a lot of things, but particularly the changes to certain actuarial assumptions established by the actuary in its recent experience study, notably reducing the assumed rate of return from 7.5% to 7.1%, changing mortality tables moving from a mortality tables that are germane to the general public to one that's specific to teachers, which increased ages. So that's a once in a blue moon event. There'll be no more changes in mortality tables. There won't need to be any more changes to mortality tables to reflect a teacher-specific population. That's been done. It's a one-off event, and it represents a big shift, with this experience study. Also, additionally, they adopted a generational approach with these mortality tables, so they are now assuming that a 25-year-old is going to live a little bit longer than a 65-year-old. So really two significantly unique things done with this experience study with the mortality tables. Then also they lowered payroll growth from 3.5% to 2.75%, all which bring in more money. Lowering the payroll growth moves you from a little bit further from level percentage of payroll approach to paying off your unfunded liability to level dollar. So that's more money coming up front, and then a little bit less at the end when you lower payroll growth. So all those things have acted together, and that's why you see an increase here. At yesterday's board meeting, the board adopted immediately all of these more conservative assumptions. They will appear in the fiscal year 2021 valuation in our liabilities and be reflected in our funded status fully. The actuary did recommend smoothing in the contributions, not the assumptions, but the contributions payable as a result of those changed contributions, smoothing those in just like with the current smoothing in of investment gains. Those are smoothed over a 5-year period. The actuary recommended to the board yesterday smoothing in the contributions as well. You get fully funded at the same point in time. Doesn't change that. It is an actuarially sound method of implementing a funding plan to address current cost and unfunded liability. It's a methodology, the smoothing, that's being adopted by other states as a trend. North Carolina, Connecticut, I believe Georgia, Alabama, several states now are smoothing not just investment gains, they are smoothing contribution requests in the budget as a result of changes in actuarial assumptions. And again, you get to the exact same 100% funded status, at the same time. And this also acknowledges, we had a historic year, 29.95% return for the year in investments, gains of $6 billion just for the pension trust. So that's what's going on with that. And then below that, those boxes that I just mentioned, the $733 million, the $801 million, we see a line for what we call the TRS budget request, the total TRS budget request. It's not all the dollars that TRS gets, but it's all the dollars that in our budget or in the TRS budget request, and I'll explain that in just a second. So if you add all of those numbers together, you get $808,400,000 requested by TRS in its budget for fiscal year 23, and $883,200,000 requested from the TRS budget for fiscal year 24. So what that does not reflect is the dollars that TRS receives by statute. It's the 13.105% for members hired before July 1st, 2008, 14.105% for members hired on or after July 1st, 2008, that TRS receives through the SEEK formula. That budget request for those SEEK dollars, and the state makes those retirement contributions that I just discussed on behalf of the school districts, those go through the SEEK formula as part of KDE's budget request. We work with KDE, provide them numbers, but that budget request comes through them. And you'll see those SEEK dollars, $441,900,000 for fiscal year 23, $455,100,000 for fiscal year 24. So all in, dollars coming to TRS projected for the next 2 fiscal years of the upcoming budget biennium will be $1,250,300,000 in fiscal year 23, $1,338,300,000 for fiscal year 24. I'm going to also talk about the very bottom line on this slide. These are not dollars that TRS receives, but as part of the budget process, these dollars are noted in our budget. These reflect debt service for the issuance of 3 bonds as part of the shared responsibility legislation of 2010. So quickly, those bonds, the first one was issued in August of 2010, $467 million. That was to repay the pension plan fund in full for all contributions that have been reallocated from it temporarily to the medical insurance fund for a few years to pay costs of medical insurance. And that was just done temporarily to keep health insurance going for retirees. Everybody knew it was a short-term solution. Shared responsibility fixed that. Great news. So, and great news too, the Commonwealth issued that bond in 2010, repaid the pension fund fully. And then there were 2 more bonds, one in 2011 and one in 2013, to provide transitional funding for health insurance as shared responsibility kicked in. Because it didn't kick in, teachers didn't make 3% contributions out of their paycheck immediately. That was phased in over a period of 6 years. So Commonwealth also provides some transitional funding for health insurance. That debt service is actually paid to the entities that bought those 3 bonds. It's not something TRS receives. So we always want to point that out. It's part of our budget and explain what that is, so they're anticipate any questions there might be about it.
So before you move on, I'm just a little bit, I just want to make sure I'm clear. When you're talking about the amortized payments and then the additional employer contributions required in 23 and 24, your actuary suggested that you blend those in over a 5-year period?
Yes.
Okay. And do these numbers that you have on this sheet here reflect a blended number, or is that the full amount if they weren't blended?
The 707 is the smoothed amount.
That is the smoothed amount. Okay. That was your question. Okay. All right. Thank you. I do want to point out, I believe the general fund budget last year was about 12.5 or 12.8 billion, something like that. And if you just look at what 2023's dollars are going to be, I'm seeing 1.267 billion. So that's 10% basically of the entire state's general fund budget. I want just people to realize is going to pay for educator pensions. 10% of the entire state general fund budget is going to that number. Just it's mind-boggling to realize. And when we hear that we need to pay teachers more, I agree. We need better roads. We need better this. But when 10% of any budget item is going to that, that's significant. And so I'm glad we're getting our arms around it and getting it down. Or it's not really getting down, but we're getting it in control in the next 24 years. But it's just something to keep, I think, in our forefront. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. That concludes my remarks on that slide. I have one more slide. And we've been getting a lot of questions about this recently. And there's a line reflecting these amounts in the slide we just looked at. And this is something we've discussed before this board in the past, and that is the Commonwealth of Kentucky is making certain actuarial payments for certain benefit adjustments that happened in the past and are ongoing. The ongoing has been sick leave. So when sick leave is used for retirement calculation purposes, the statutes provide that the Commonwealth shall pay the actuarial cost of that. And there's also, as part of these benefit adjustments that are reflected on the slide, there were some supplemental COLAs in addition to the 1.5% COLA in years when budgets were better. Now, there haven't been any of those, for 2007 to 8. There haven't been any additional COLAs. But because these are 20-year amortized periods, the Commonwealth is still making some payments on those old cost of living adjustments. Now, these are going to run out. I think the COLAs, the last payment is 2027, okay? And then that line's blank. You see below that there's non-single subsidy. Retired teachers used to have a non-single subsidy, and the state was paying for some of that cost on an amortized basis. You see the state's making its last payment this year, so that goes to zero. But this just reflects the cost of those sort of amortized payments that used to be paid lump sum every year. They weren't paid on an installment basis. But then in the late 90s, the state shifted to paying these on an installment basis with interest, okay? So you can see the total payment estimated for 2022 is $117,841,500, and that the outstanding balance, and this is estimated, it'll be a little bit different, when we are several months in further along, but the estimated balance right now, $487,323,590. So if all of those current amortized payments were paid off, that would be the estimated cost as of June 30th, 2022. That would result in a savings to the Commonwealth of a reduction in the ADEC of about 1 percentage point, or about $37 million a year. I'm just providing these again because these are part of our budget request and just reflect the method they're being paid for and offer information I've been asked about before about what would happen if we paid these dollars off. Sometimes not called the green box dollars.
Okay, thank you.
And that concludes my presentation on the budget request for the upcoming biennium. I'd be more than happy to take any questions that there might be.
Do we have any questions? Senator Mills.
Thank you, Bo. 2 questions. Back to the chairman's question about smoothing. Approximately, what would the increase have been if those numbers weren't smooth?
Okay. So I don't have exact numbers, because I don't have exact numbers for the 707 because that's going to change. Yeah. So if I may, for today, give sort of a range, because I don't want to overstate or understate, but it would be approaching $200 million additionally. So maybe between $150, $160 to $200 million additional range, something there. I think I'm pretty close with that.
And then one other question.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you explain the sick leave again on these green box dollars? Just a little bit more detail. I'm sorry, I'm still new. I'm trying.
Oh, sure. No, I'm glad to.
Trying to get a grip on this.
So, when teachers retire, they by statute, it's a KDE statute. It's not a TRS statute, but it's a KDE statute. They may be compensated by the school district for their unused sick leave at 30% of their daily rate. And that's a lump sum payment by the district. The district is not required to make that payment, but everybody does. And they're not required to pay 30%. They could pay less, but I think everybody today is paying 30%. Then that lump sum payment is added to the retiring teacher's last year annual salary for retirement calculation purposes. So it increases their final average salary, and then it increases their retirement benefit. So there's an actuarial cost of increasing that benefit by, say, 5%. And by statute, the Commonwealth is to pay for the actuarial cost of that sick leave use.
Yes, sir. Gotcha. Thank you.
And on that, am I seeing that sick leave costs went up from 21 to 22, but sick leave costs are going down in 23 and 24? Maybe I'm looking at that wrong. Is that what I'm seeing?
What you have there, you're looking at the amortized payments line.
Right.
That's because that includes that non-single subsidy and those supplemental COLAs. Those are rolling off. Okay, so that's why we're seeing a reduction there. Sick leave is staying about the same, but we're rolling off some of those old cost of living adjustments that go back to the early 2000s. And that's why we're seeing the reduction.
Okay, it might be helpful just if we had a breakout of what those costs were, but that's fine. Okay. Any Co-Chair Higdon, are you on the line, sir? You have a question?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Bo, taking a look at the 63 million is the amortized payment on the green box dollars, 63 million and change, and a balance of $382 million. What's the cost? What are we rolling on there? What are we showing the cost for this past year? What are you adding to that? Do you say you're amortizing it? So what amount are we adding to this year to be amortized over the next 20 years?
Well, this is these numbers are going to reflect, all increases as a result of those assumption changes. But the sick leave, which is a component, well, let me back up.
That's what I'm asking for, the green box dollars. You have your amortization, the 63 million that you're paying every year, and you have a balance of 382, but you're paying, you're adding a total this year that you're going to amortize for 20 years. What you had this year is what I assume sick leave cost you last year. What is that dollar amount?
Okay, so for the most recently completed year, and this is high. I mean, we're probably looking at sick leave cost at these are balances. Apologize. Sick leave cost is about $38 million a year for that actuarial cost of it that we bill the state. And that's what, we would be asking for if it were paid in lump sum, but it's not being paid in lump sum. It's being paid with interest at 7.5%. So that's why you're going to see, the higher numbers requested for sick leave to include the interest. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but does that help?
No, that helps. It's 38 million. And go back to and doing this remotely is difficult for me to see your slides, but our contribution, our ask at one time, our couple years in 16, the ARC or the Adec that you asked for was like around 500 million in each year, and it's gone up about 50 million a year, 50 million, 80 million. What is the increase this year that you're asking for? I think, what is those numbers, 23 and 24?
Yes, sir. So you're seeing an increase from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 23 in that additional funding that we need to implement the funding plan, the additional ADEC. That's going up about $50 million. And then from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24, because of starting to implement those assumption changes, you're seeing an increase of about $77 million here. But again, that will be a little bit less when we get the final numbers from the actuary.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And you mentioned it was 38 million-ish a year for sick leave. And then when I asked the question a few minutes ago, you said you expected it to stay the same. But then if it's going from 7.5 down to 7.1, and then you also have folks, you changed the mortality tables, seems like to me that number has to go up from 38 million. I mean, it seems like it has to go up.
It's not the driver that for the decrease in those green box dollar numbers that we're seeing on the line. That's the supplemental COLAs and non-single subsidy. the sick leave is going to be more stable. You know, you're going to see increases. Some years you actually see decreases because you just, for whatever reason that year, you have less people with people with less sick leave, or lower salaries, you know. So it fluctuates somewhat. We have a history that certainly we'd be happy to share with the board, you know, of the history of the sick leave payments.
Thank you. Senator Mills.
One other question on that 38 million. Why are we borrowing money at 7.8%? Did I hear you say that correctly? Is that?
It was 7.5%. It's going to be 7.1%. That's just the assumed rate of return of the money that we can earn on those dollars.
I understand. So. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, I might add, we spoke, sorry to butt in, but we talked about that last month, at finding a cheaper interest rate and paying that off. Would certainly be attractive at some point. I'm sure we could do a little better than 7.1. Kind of similar to what we did with the money that we paid back, the money we borrowed from the insurance side back in 2008 that's starting to roll off now. It might be a good thing to look at.
I think that's a great idea, Senator. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Barnes, thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Okay. And then Bo Craycraft, if you got the cleanup batter. Sorry, buddy. Maybe next month.
All right. All right. For the record, my name is Bo Craycraft, and I'm the Executive Director of the Judicial Form Retirement System. I'm joined today with two of my board members, Mr. Stephen LaLauren and our newest member, Ben Allison. It's been a few months since I've been here, so it's good to see you guys. In a prior life, I got to see you guys on a monthly basis, so it's been a little bit. So I just wanted to real quickly give you just a couple key organizational updates. As you can see there on the top of slide 2, we've added 2 new board members to our Board of Trustees since our last meeting. A lot of you folks will know Mr. Scott Brinkman, former legislator, House of Representative, also executive branch cabinet, I think, secretary and a practicing attorney in Louisville. He joined us in May as a joint appointee of the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. And so we're really excited to have his experience and knowledge on the board. And then just weeks ago, we were appointed Mr. Ben Allison, who has graciously joined me today. And I really just wanted to give him just a minute to introduce himself to you all so you could put a face with a name and he could share a little bit of his background.
Thanks, Bo. I think you can hear me.
Turn that on.
I need to turn that on. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I look forward to working with Bo and Steve and the other board members. Just a quick background. I've been, various jobs, but I have had 27 years of investment experience, 19 of that in the institutional world, working for 2 firms in Louisville. And then the last 8 years owning my own investment advisory firm, working for individuals. I did get my chartered financial analyst designation back in '97. And my experience kind of cuts across, years and years of fixed income, and then the last 8 years really working in the equity side. So hopefully I can bring that experience working with both individuals and institutions to the board, and look forward to working with them.
So we're really excited. He takes the spot of A.C. Donahue and will serve as one of our investment professionals. And so again, just wanted him to get a chance to introduce himself. 2 other key things. I know you all in the past, I have participated in the meetings as a viewer. I know you all have talked about experience studies and actuarial audits. I wanted to let you guys know that in April, our board did approve a recent experience study. The experience study was actually conducted in October of 2020 but with the passing of Donna and the transition, it actually did not get formally adopted until April, but there were some slight revisions to some of our assumptions that will be incorporated into the current valuations that are being conducted. Most of them were very minor with regards to turnover and retirements, but we, like you guys have discussed on several occasions with the other plans, we have had some updates to our mortality table, and we too have included some improvement scale into our mortality tables to mimic what the KPPA plans and TRS plans do. The other thing that I will note, and something that you'll see notably when we get to the budget request, is that the board also has revised their assumed rate of return for the cash balance plans. As they were created and in their seeding phase in their early days, they had a different return assumption than the legacy tier, the more traditional defined benefit plan. But now that it has reached a 5-year track record and we are providing upside credit, they have adjusted the assumed rate of return to mimic that of the target of the legacy plan. And so effectively, we're able to consolidate the valuations, and we'll too be providing kind of a single funding level, a single budget request, and then we'll have the underlying data. You're going to note that the cash balance plans in some cases are a little underfunded, whereas the legacy plans are kind of helping offset that, specifically with regards to LRP, because we're not currently receiving current funds. If you just look at the benefit, the tier membership alone, but when you combine those together, the funding of the legacy plans helps to offset that. So I just wanted to make note of that. Like I said, you'll see that when we get to the biennial budget preliminary request. Given we haven't been here for a couple of months, we just wanted to quickly just provide the data with regards to investment returns and cash flow. This is our fiscal year end, much like the story you heard with regards to the two other plans. The returns have been good. I'll just note, and I know Mr. LaLauren just wants to make a few brief comments. I'll just note on this slide that the benchmark return, that 27.5 got copied twice. Those numbers need to kind of shift to the left one. So the 1-year number is 27.5, 3-year number is 14.7, and so on. There should not be an inception to date return because those two portfolios have different inception to date dates. So, Mr. LaLauren?
Yeah, I just want to make a few brief comments. You may recall that we've been using Hilliard Lyons for many years as our sole investment manager for all of our plans. Hilliard has merged with a company named Baird Financial, and they're going to eventually shelve the name Hilliard Lyons. It's going to be known as Baird. I may make a mistake now and then and call them Hilliard, but I mean it's Baird. The strategy that we've been employing since the last time we met is essentially the same as we've used for a number of years. It's essentially a 70-30 mix of stocks over bonds. Our style of investing it's a sort of a mix of conservative and aggressive. It's conservative in that we only use publicly traded investments and high-quality investments in our portfolios. It's more aggressive, if you will, because we have a relatively high stock allocation. And we feel comfortable with that because of our good funded status, and that has actually paid dividends to us for quite a while. Now I'd like to comment briefly about the hybrid plans. When the hybrid plans started 5 years ago, they had 0 assets in them, and it wasn't really possible to invest in the same way we did for the legacy defined benefit plans with individual securities. So instead, with cash flows coming in, we would buy units of a couple of index fund, a bond and a stock index fund, S&P 500 and Lehman or Barclays Intermediate Gov Credit bond index. And those are the same indexes we use for the defined benefit plan. And our objective was that we would expect to have performance very similar in the hybrid plans as we do in the DB plans because they're invested in essentially the same way using different strategies. We're now at the point where the hybrid plans are a little bit bigger. Hilliard or Baird is able to now actually invest in individual stocks for the hybrid plans using the same stocks that we use in the defined benefit plans. We have sold out of the exchange-traded funds benchmarked against the S&P 500, sold out of those, and instead replaced them with securities that are essentially the same as we have in the DB plan. That means that over time, the stock portion of the portfolio should perform in the hybrid plans the same as the DB plans. We think that's a good step to take over time. On the fixed income side, fixed income securities, it's hard to buy small lots of bonds. So instead of buying individual bonds, we're continuing to invest in exchange-traded funds, but fixed income ones. We've changed the strategy a little bit. Instead of having a single index fund, we're using a few sector exchange-traded funds to better mimic the corporate bond exposures that we have in the defined benefit plan. So in total, we expect the hybrid plans will perform in a way that's very similar to the defined benefit plans. Other than that, there's no major changes in the style that Baird has been using in managing all of our portfolios.
And like I said, the cash flow is just there for your records. We've normally done that on a quarterly basis, so just so that you would have access to that. And then the last slide is the preliminary budget request. This should look very similar to information that Ms. Early had shown in the past. Most notably, as I mentioned in our opening slide in the introduction, you're going to note that with regards to LRP, the budget request this year, preliminarily speaking, is zero. And part of that has to do with the change in the return assumption. As those plans were growing, we were using a 4% discount rate. Now we're using a 6.5% discount rate, so that reduces the liability a little bit. But the other notable point is that when we incorporate the legacy plan and we evaluate these as one tier or one plan with two tiers, you can see that the legacy plan can help offset some of that cash balance under unfunded liability. So on the JRP, much like you've heard today, the budget request appears to be going down. Again, I think a lot of that is being driven by the performance of the funds on the investment side. You look at a 10-year return of 13.5%, that's double the assumption. So whether it's smoothed or not, it's a strong actuarial gain. And so this plan has benefited from those strong equity returns that we've all experienced. With that, the bottom half of the slide just shows, you can see a little bit of those minor changes. You can see the mortality table has been updated to the PUG-G above median with a bit of an improvement scale. There's been a slight change, based on our membership with regards to marriage, and the turnover was slightly adjusted for the JRP to no turnover based on experience. With that, that's all of our prepared comments. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to try to address those.
Bo, it's a great report, and I see that Representative Miller has a question.
Thank you. I always love to hear the JFRS report. It's always so good. Way to end our meetings. I've got working on a bill request to make a small change to assumption changes to bifurcate between demographic and financial. Mm-hmm. And members, what that would do would say those things that you have to have a lot of actuarial work on mortality and turnover and et cetera, would be every 5 years on the same cycle. But the financial, which are much less costly, and it's really not an onerous process to update your financial, that every biennium we would do that. And it would soften the blows when we have big changes, not you all, but in TRS, we're going to have some significant changes, that it would smooth that out a little bit. Mm-hmm. So do you all have any comment on that you'd like to make?
No real comment, pro or con. With regards to economic assumptions, for the most part, you're talking about the assumed rate of return for our plan. I will say that prior to my arrival, I know the actuaries, not only has Hilliard Lyons changed they're now Baird. Our actuary Finley has merged with USI, so our Finleys are now Finley is now USI. I know Finley, which is now USI, has encouraged, and the board has encouraged you to consider kind of updating our funding policy. We have a fixed kind of amortization policy of 1% of our unfunded liability plus interest, which is a little odd when you think about compared to what we've talked about a lot with closed windows and level dollar or level percent. I say all that to say that with regards to payroll growth and some of the other economic assumptions that you all deal with, that doesn't really come into play with our plan giving our amortization policy. Now, I think we would like to at some point via maybe a housekeeping bill to revisit that and give our plan a more traditional amortization policy so that in the event we don't have such strong investment returns, we have a funding policy that has a targeted date of paying off our unfunded liability, specifically on the JRP plan. And in that case, payroll growth would become more of a kind of a key discussion topic. I think our board, I've attended 4 meetings. We talk about the return assumption almost every meeting, and clearly we're in an interesting time where, we've had these extended gains. And, I think much like what we've talked about in prior PPOB meetings, what's driving a lot of our board's discussion is how do they want to allocate the assets. And, they've been very consistent with a 70-30 kind of split between large cap and short-term corporate-based fixed income. And when you look at long-term capital market assumptions of 10 years or so, they feel pretty comfortable somewhere in that 6.5, range. That doesn't mean that if we looked at them, more frequently, it wouldn't 7 or 6.25. So I don't think we would have a problem. Mr. LaLauren, you want to?
I don't think so.
One follow-up. Regarding your equity investments, do you diversify with international as well as domestic?
No.
Okay, you're purely domestic.
Purely domestic, and the logic behind that, in part, is we don't want to do currency. That's one of the reasons why we don't like international. But many of the companies that we invest in are companies that are international or global. And so we have international exposure through the ownership of domestic U.S. companies that have overseas businesses.
Good plan. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? I'll just make a comment, and I guess we'll close. It's interesting that for the last 2 budgets, the legislature didn't fund LRP, and here we are. You're telling us, don't fund us again.
I'm not saying that forever. I'm saying that for potentially for the next budget biennium. And again, I think it has to do with the performance from Baird / Hilliard Lyons. They've done a very wonderful job, and they deserve the pat on the back. I don't think any of us will take that.
Yeah, fair enough. With that, this meeting is adjourned.